Hello, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of Kinda Hot, Kinda Healthy. If you are new here, because this is a guest episode, we always have some new people coming into our crew. I am Allie. If you are not watching on YouTube, then get familiar with my voice. If you're watching on YouTube, we have a beautiful background today. But my name is Allie. I am a nutrition coach and a fitness coach, and I help women who have struggled with weight loss because of overwhelm. You guys, I gained 30 pounds because I was overwhelmed AF in my life, and I had to redefine fitness and nutrition for myself. And that is something I brought into my own business. And now I help women overcome their overwhelm, lose weight, keep it off, feel fucking good in their body because I hated my body for like 2.5 years. Like, did not want to be in a picture, dodged a picture, only did a selfie because I was just like, this is not me. Like, I don't know who the hell this body is, but it's not mine. And so that is just an overview of like what I do, who I work with, and my co-host Maddie can introduce herself now.
Yeah, I'm Maddie Martinez. I'm also a women's health and fitness coach. Sometimes some men just slide in there, but mostly for women. I teach perfectionists and recovering perfectionists how to get lean and strong. So we stop making the perfect healthy recipes, eating organic only, and putting all this pressure on ourselves, and we simplify it so you get leaner sustainably. And we make your workouts, we take them from the sweaty workouts where you're trying to be number one on the leaderboard to we're actually going to build muscle and get over our mindset hurdles of I have to be perfect, I have to do everything or nothing. So that's what I
Mm,
help women with.
love it. And we created this podcast because we wanted to have a space where we could create that community and teach and talk about things that are genuinely interesting us, bring you awesome guests, but also have a lot of fun. We do pop culture, reality TV, but also health topics because that is in an essence who we are. Like kind of hot, kind of healthy is where like pop culture meets health. We do it all and you're going to walk away with every episode learning something. Because even when it comes to like pop culture, we talk about things that you might be seeing the Real Housewives doing and wondering, should I do that for my own weight loss or my workouts? And we're going to talk about it because the impact that like mainstream media has on your decision making with health, workouts, the way you eat, it is so in your face. And I that's like the cool part of like what we get to do here on the podcast is bring two of the worlds that we are like obsessed with together.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we've done episodes talking about pop culture and their effects on health and America's Next Top Model and,
Oof.
everything. So we have some really good previous pop culture episodes, but we have a playlist on YouTube. So if you are not subscribed, which you are not, if you're listening for the first time, go subscribe to our YouTube channel. You get to watch us and our guests, and we have a whole playlist of all the guest episodes we've had. And we've had some bangers so far,
Yeah.
2025. Like
Yeah.
we plan out for a while. We are excited for the rest of the year, but you can watch all the guest episodes there. And we cover lots of different stuff beyond just, like getting leaner and losing fat. We want to this to be a place where you come to laugh, sometimes cry. Watch us cry. I don't think
Not
we've
me
done that
crying
yet.
about the anglerfish.
The anglerfish.
Like that was a real that was one of the rawest moments for me.
Did you see how small it was actually?
So tiny. That made it
Like,
worse.
I didn't
That made it
realize
worse.
that
Girl,
was
don't even bring it
crazy.
up. Like don't bring it up because
But
it's too
okay, my
much.
my biggest question, just to put a pin on the anglerfish, and if you don't know what we're talking about, this is coming out in a few months, so go back a few months. I don't know.
You'll know. Everybody knows about the anglerfish. Come on.
Well, I'm talking about our conversation, but
Oh, they'll
in
then go back and listen to it. It was
yeah,
episode 69. Go
there
back
you
and
go,
listen to it.
69. But my question is, what were the odds that there was a photographer there? That's what I don't
Man,
get.
Well, it's not like they were following the journey of the anglerfish. Like they were just there. It's just one of those cosmic moments where everything lines up and they're there just probably filming themselves, trying to get content. Like this is like an oceanic photographer. They like to photograph fish, or maybe they were just there with like, I know it wasn't a GoPro, but think like GoPro on the head, just swimming around doing things. Like it was just one of those moments where everything aligned. And man, whew, my heart, my heart. I am, they like the invisible string theory.
Mhm.
Somehow I am attached to that anglerfish, and I truly believe that because I have never cried so much over an animal. I mean, probably that's a lie. I've never cried over an animal this much over an animal I didn't know.
Okay, I'll give you that. And hey,
Yeah.
I have had that invisible string theory for probably many other things in my life. Probably
I have
one
a
of my
parasocial relationship with a fish.
is it still parasocial if they're dead?
Wow. Well, it was alive. So
Oh,
I
dead
think
now.
RIP
Uh,
to a real one.
RIP. Well, before she hops on, give you a little bit of brief preview. We have Elanie Welch coming on. I was actually on her podcast with her co-host Kay, Nutrition Renegade, and we talked about building muscle and getting stronger. And I believe this was, I think, when she was still pregnant. I can't remember, but we were talking about the importance of building muscle and losing bone density. It was a really good conversation. I will actually put it in the show notes so you guys can go and listen to that. But we have Elanie Welch on talking about homesteading. And we were talking about homesteading in the podcast because she was like, I want to stay strong so I can participate in the homesteading life because the homesteading life is not for the weak. You can't be
No.
lifting barrels of hay when you can, barely lift your body weight off the floor. So we have lots of good stuff to talk about with her, including her documentary that she created with Kay. I don't know all the details on that, but I'm really excited to get to hear all of them from her.
Yeah. I'm super excited because the idea, like, I would like to do homesteading light. I couldn't fully
Hmm.
do the whole homesteading, but it's really interesting to me. And I
Hmm.
don't even know where you start to get into it. Like that is one of the things I'm really excited to talk to her about because you see all these videos online, you see the videos on TikTok, and I'm like, how do people go from A to B with this? My
I
mind
know
doesn't understand.
sometimes I find myself on like homesteading TikTok and then they're talking about like which birds are the best birds to get. And besides like chickens or ducks, and I think they're called runner ducks, they're actually better than chickens because they're sturdier. Like they can withstand the elements better. They eat lots of bugs.
Oh,
Their eggs have more good fats in it. So I'm like, okay, good runner ducks
that's
on the list.
interesting.
Yeah,
That
but
is
they
really
are
interesting.
they are runner ducks.
Well, I mean, given the name, I would hope, or else that would just be like kind of funny. Like you have like Biggie Smalls, like wasn't small. So hope the runner duck maybe it would be really funny if the runner duck was slow as hell. But anyways, as we babble here, we are going to jump into the interview. Welcome to the kind of hot, kind of healthy universe. We hope you stay. And if you want to subscribe on YouTube, it's kind of hot, kind of healthy. Same with TikTok, same with Instagram. We're a lot of fun. We're really cool, and we're happy that you're here.
So welcome, Elaney. I am super excited to have you here. So why don't you give us a little introduction to who you are, what you do, and yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, my name's Elanie Welch. I'm a certified nutrition specialist. So I'm first and foremost a nutritionist. But I've been practicing nutrition for about 6 years now. And I'm also the co-host with my podcast partner Kay of the Renegade Nutrition podcast, and started that as a means of helping people on a larger scale. I practice in Iowa, which doesn't recognize my nutrition license. So
Mm.
the podcast was a way for me basically to, hence the name Renegade Nutrition, was kind of like a way to say, all right, forget your rules that don't make sense and your policies that don't make sense. I'm still going to help people. Got a master's in nutrition. I have 1,000 clinical hours. I passed my nutrition
Wow.
boards. Like I did everything a dietitian would have to do, but they're allowed to practice and I'm not. So um, the podcast was kind of my way of rebelling against that and helping people anyway, since I was being told I couldn't.
That's
So,
crazy.
yeah, that's why I started the Renegade Nutrition podcast. So I do that in addition to seeing people one-on-one for nutrition coaching. And then what else do, and then I'm a homesteader, which is what we're going to talk about today. And I've done that homesteading with my husband for, oh my gosh, this is our 10th year, I think.
Oh, wow.
Doing.
Wow.
So, yes.
Dang. I have so many questions. So explain to me really quick about, so you're not allowed to practice, but you still take clients. How does that work?
Yeah, so my supervisor and mentor is a registered dietitian as well as a CNS like myself, and
Hmm.
did that. She was based in California. She's in Idaho now. And then she had to transfer her dietetics license to Iowa. But once she did that, I could basically practice under her license. So she's the one who oversaw all my clinical
Oh,
hours. That's the way we worked it out. So if I wanted to practice here, I have to work under either a medical doctor or a registered dietitian. And then there's some gray area with chiropractors.
Wow.
They can also, which is kind of ridiculous, right? That like the average medical doctor in the US has had one, if that, one nutrition
Yep.
class. And so
Hmm.
they don't have any nutrition training, but they're qualified to speak about nutrition. And after
mhm.
thousands of hours of learning and clinical hours, I'm still not technically qualified in Iowa's eyes. So it's like
That's
insane to me,
crazy.
but yeah, so
Yeah.
that's how I do it. It's all under her license.
Gotcha. I mean, not, and when I was on your podcast and I talked about it in the preview before you got on, we did talk about some of that stuff when it comes to, me and Allie aren't like down with, big pharma, but there is some big holes to where it's not actually helping the patient quality of life. And
Yeah.
just that, like one class versus like all of the hours and hours and hours that we've all collectively put into it. Like that's, it's very unfair how they have that. And they have that
Yeah.
on purpose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I have nothing against dietitians. I think they're awesome. I have many friends who are also registered dietitians and then have chosen to go a more holistic route. Because in general, like just the average dietetics degree is more reactionary. So they're more in
Mhm.
a clinical setting, in a hospital setting. So they may be working with somebody after they've had the heart attack or
Sure.
once they're diagnosed with diabetes. And it tends to be based more, which the dietitians that I've known don't appreciate this about it, but it tends to be based more in conventional nutrition wisdom. So it's
Mhm.
based more on the food pyramid and, um,
Yep.
like the eat a billion servings of grains a day and limit your saturated fats, which we all know is like BS, but still forms the basis of our food pyramid, which is why I decided not to go that route because I felt like it would just drive me crazy having to
Yeah.
learn those things in school. And that's not to throw shade at dietitians, because, like I said, most of the ones I know have much more like common sense than that and are big believers in holistic care and are limited in the setting in which they practice. They're not allowed to practice the way they want to either. But it was
Right.
the dietetics board that originally lobbied to prevent nutritionists from being able to practice. So I don't have anything against dietitians because they don't have anything to do with the board members who made that decision.
Yeah.
But it was
Mhm.
all for the sake of money. It was
Of
because
course.
it's like literally in the meeting notes from the court trial where they won that case and prevented nutritionists in the state of Iowa from being able to practice. It was because they didn't want anybody taking insurance money from them and they didn't want to be losing money. And they felt like nutritionists would basically compete. And so they did everything they could to keep nutritionists from being able to practice under the guise of, well, dietitians, know more on a clinical setting. They know how to work with medications. And anyway, so nothing against dietitians. I think they're wonderful. I think they have their place. All the ones I've ever
Mhm.
met have been very committed to helping people the right way, but there's just something really, really wrong with the system. It's really quite broken.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, that is, unfortunately, it's not surprising, but it is so upsetting because you go through so much schooling and education and you put in the hours, and then it has to, come down to probably men at the top are just like, no, you know what? No, we're blocking this. And I think it's awesome that you do have your podcast to use as an outlet, right? Like that's what is really awesome about podcasting because it's your space that you own versus like different forms of social media. Like you don't own that. So I love that you have your podcast and that is your place of power to speak out on. That is so awesome. I
Oh,
mean,
thanks, Allie.
it's not awesome half of that, but the podcast is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The podcast has
Yeah.
been it's been a great opportunity. And I really do think it's helped so many more people than I would have been. So I don't feel like we go through any of the trials we go through just for no reason. And I
Yeah.
think like the biggest thing that I've gone through in the struggle with being able to practice my own profession was that it then opened the door for me to start that podcast. And there are people
Mhm.
that we would have never helped.
Mhm.
The information we've shared has made a big difference for. And I'm really thankful that those things have happened. And now it's fine. I work under my advisor, and that's all good. But I am still working on anytime we can implement policy change. I'm still emailing all of our district like representatives all the time and working. The ANA, the American Nutrition Association, does work within the states where nutritionists aren't allowed to practice to help lobby and allow them to practice. So I work with them too, just all the time trying to change that. But policies can take decades to change. So
Geez, what don't you do? Policy reform, podcast, homesteading.
it does
You do
sound
it
like a lot
all.
when you say it all, yes.
That's awesome though. Like it's so cool.
Yeah, thank you, ladies.
So let's talk homesteading. You brought it up when I was on your podcast, and I was like, "Oh, we need to talk more about this." Like, what got you into homesteading?
Yeah, that's a funny story. I'm not totally sure exactly. I've always loved, like, my mom always had a garden. She's totally a black thumb. Like, she kills everything. I don't know why she gardened year after year, but I kind of like just grew up around her always trying that. We always seemed to have something somewhere, like a little tiny garden plot. I don't really remember ever eating anything out of the garden. It might not have lived long enough to like make it to our place. But I think that it was just in my mind that you have a garden when you have a house. And whether it's like a flower garden or an herb garden or a vegetable garden or fruit trees, like we definitely had, I grew up in California. So we had lots of citrus trees. That was always something. So we did always have some form of food we grew in our backyard, even if it was just tangerines and Meyer lemons or grapefruits, or we had a plum tree when we moved to Carpinteria. So I think it was in my mind that wherever you live, you have a way to grow something. And so I started, this is actually, this is a funny story. I would lived in apartments all through college. And once I was able to move out of my like college dormitories into an apartment complex, I noticed one day when I walked out of the apartment complex, now here in Iowa, that there was a little empty plot of dirt right outside where there'd maybe been flowers or something, and there was some mulch, but it was just empty now, and it was under one of the like exit fire staircases or something, and nobody was using it. It was like off the backside of the building, and so I asked the administrators if I could use it and just grow a little garden. I was like, can I just plant some peppers and marigolds and tomatoes and basil, just something really small? And they said, sure, nobody's using that, go for it. So I bought all the little seedling starts. I planted it all. I watered it. I loved that garden. I like walked out every day out the back of the building. Nobody was ever back there. It was just woods and forests and landscape behind us. It was really pretty. And then I had my little garden and I would talk to my little plants. And the groundskeeper was rather elderly. He was almost totally deaf. He was about 80 years old plus at that point. Um, and I don't think his vision was very good either. His name was Dale. I love him. He's since passed away. I mean, he would have been like 100 today, but anyway, I came out one day and he had weed whacked my entire garden
Oh,
Oh no.
oh,
down to the ground, like marigold heads
oh.
strewn about, my pepper plants just cut off at the base. It was like he was like, "What are these weeds doing out here?"
Oh no.
Like on the backside of his building where it's just empty dirt, he just cut down all my flowers, all my plants. Like
Oh.
it's funny now, and I was so sad then because I'd like put so much time into it, and there's no coming back from that. That's not
Yeah,
like yeah. So anyway, that was my very first garden on my own outside of my house. That was literally my first gardening experience where I was like, oh, my mom always had a garden. I should have a garden, and it felt like it was this big moment of being an adult, like
Yeah.
this thing. And then there it was, just totally destroyed. But I did keep them again after that, and then always had like just something. And then my husband and I always kind of joke about this. Thank you. He's bringing me my water. Um, because neither of us talked about like homesteading ever before we got married. It wasn't like a conversation where it was like, I want to homestead. Do you want to homestead? Sure, let's homestead.
Mhm.
Like that never happened. He liked gardening and he always kept a garden. He had a garden at his house. And when we started dating, I got to just help with the garden at his house. And we kind of made it bigger every year and grew more things, garlic and tomatoes and peppers, and got more like extravagant with it. But we never had this conversation of wanting to homestead, but randomly a friend was a beekeeper and said, "Do you guys want to get into beekeeping?" And I was working for a like farm at the time that was local in the area. They actually also had like a it was a multi-structured business, but they were a farm. They had pasture-raised meat, but they also were a supplement company. They sold like more
Oh,
holistic
wow.
supplements. And they also had a farm to table cafe restaurant. And I worked in quality control for the supplement part of the business. But it was a very small business. And randomly, I would go out and help on the farm when they needed it. Like one day, I had to help tag sheep because like they
Mhm.
didn't have the help they needed. So I kind of had real rough basic experience there, but they wanted to keep bees, and my then boyfriend, now husband, was interested in beekeeping. And so they basically like pulled us aside and were like, "Hey, we want to keep bees. We don't want to actually do it ourselves. Do you want to like start the beekeeping here on our property and it will help with the orchards and all the other aspects of the farming?" And so he said yes. So we started keeping bees together, and that was the gateway into everything else. Like
Oh.
beekeeping became so fascinating and there's so much to learn. And then before we knew it, we were getting chickens, and then we had goats. And then our garden became like a half of an acre. And then we started a CSA where we were like a community supported
Oh, wow.
share,
Wow.
where we were providing vegetables through the summer for, I think it was eight or nine families at the most. It was small, but
Wow. Yeah.
effort. But yeah, it randomly just grew from there. So there was like one day 5 years into all of that where we looked at each other. I'm like, isn't it funny that we never had this conversation of we want to homestead before we got married.
Mhm.
Do you want to get into this? I want to do it. We never had that conversation. It just really organically developed over
Mhm.
time. It was like that little tiny garden that my mom would keep kind of just planted the seed.
Yeah.
Pun intended, in my own brain, where it was like, then I wanted my own garden, and then my own tiny garden turned into a bigger garden, which turned into beekeeping, which turned into chickens, which turned into half-acre garden, which turned into dairy goats, which turned into a full fruit orchard. So
Wow.
Awesome.
that's
I
the
always look at beekeeping and I'm like, that looks so fun, but I'm terrified of getting stung.
I
Terrified.
am too. You know what? It's a funny thing. I'm actually really afraid of bees. I don't know what that says about me. But yeah, I we were catching a wild swarm one time and it was
Oh.
way too late in the season. It was the fall, so it was very cold and the bees don't move well when it's cold. And we had our bee suits on, but they were up in a tree and my husband was trying to knock them down into a bucket so that we could get them into a hive. We were just trying to save them because when they swarm
Yeah.
that late in the season, they're not going to survive on their own. Probably like because wherever they swarm to, they won't have enough honey stores to get to through
Uh,
the winter. And so we
Right.
were trying to get them into our hive, and he accidentally knocked the whole swarm onto our heads, which we had bee suits on, but they're not gonna fly away because they're like, ooh, like body warmth. And so then it was like,
oh
I
my
felt
God.
so panicked. When I was a kid, I used to have claustrophobia. I don't really have it so much anymore, but tight spaces still make me uncomfortable. But
Mhm.
I was so panicked because I had that feeling, that claustrophobic feeling of I can't get out of my suit because
Right.
he's all over it and they're not going to fly away on their own. And then, like, I was just wearing tennis shoes with my bee suit. I wasn't wearing boots, so I didn't have like my ankles protected. And they started getting around my shoes. And
Uh,
like squish them, they sting. Like in a swarm, they're pretty docile. They don't have any territory to protect. They're actually very gentle. But if you squish them, they sting you. And so like they were getting caught between my like bee suit and my ankles. So they started stinging my ankles. And so then it's like, I can't take the suit off. I can't run away. I can't do you guys, I actually like passed out. So I had
Oh
oh
my
my God.
God.
like passed out like on the grass. It was like my body was like, this is the way I feel the safest, is if I just
Oh,
her out.
I need to just like, I need to lay down. Oh my God.
Uh,
You are so brave. I would have, I don't even know what I would do in that situation
I
I
might have
think
because
you would have
passed
passed out. Yeah.
yeah, no, I might have actually had a heart attack because I'm like, I'm okay. I don't love I mean, I don't think anybody enjoys the potential of being stung, but
Mhm.
them being on you, it just
out.
like could give me the creeps. Oh
Yeah.
my God. That's crazy. Here you are trying to protect
Save.
these bees. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's
And
crazy.
bees really are, I think, so misunderstood. They're so gentle. For the most part, they'll only, because they die when they sting you, right? Like their
Yeah.
stinger comes out, it pulls their intestines with it. So,
Oh.
yeah, so it is a suicide mission for them. So they really are, they're not like wasps that can just sting and
Yeah.
survive. And they're not so territorial like wasps are. They are protective of their hive, but you have to really be up in their business in order for them to decide that it's worth killing themselves to like
Yeah.
defend what they're. So that's why when they're in a swarm, they're not very aggressive because they don't have a territory to defend. As long as they feel that the queen is safe, you could stand in the middle of a swarm and they'll fly around you and but they won't really bother you. So
Wow.
there is definitely, once you start getting into a hive, opening it up, disturbing the frames, and they start to feel threatened, then they can become a little bit more aggressive. But even with that, they'll give you a lot of warnings. You know, they'll fly into you, they change their buzzing
Mm.
sound. It's really quite fascinating. So
Yeah.
they really are more gentle than you would think. But yeah, I still think I was so traumatized by that moment. I'm still pretty hesitant a lot of times to go out.
Yeah.
My husband will go out in like a half a bee suit and just work with his hands. And I'm in my full bee suit and full gloves and boots with my pants tucked in because I'm never making that mistake again. So
Yeah.
yeah, it takes a lot to work with them, but they're fascinating. They're just
Yeah.
so interesting. And I think for me, that's what appeals so much about all of
Mhm.
homesteading is you really get to work with nature if you're doing it a little bit more holistically like we do where we incorporate principles of permaculture and organic farming. You're working with nature instead of against it, and you get to observe some really interesting interactions. And that's what appeals to me so much about it. You learn things about nature and wildlife that you would never learn because you're out there observing
Mhm.
their behaviors and you're just with them. And instead of
Yeah.
being against them, you're learning about what do they do, where do they go, what are their habits, how can I work with them, how can I incorporate this into the design of my homestead. So that's really what appeals to me the most about homesteading, I think, is we can just walk out on our land and sit and watch and observe and learn something new every day. And bees, for sure, there's all kinds of amazing things that you can learn about them. But all of nature is like that if you're taking the time to just observe it, spend time with it, look at it on a
Yeah.
closer level. There's nothing, there's just like, we're just never going to know it all. There's always
Mm.
something new to
Mhm.
learn. And I love that. Like, I am a lifelong learner. That's why I do so much all the time. I'm just always wanting to learn something new. So that appeals to me.
Wow. I,
I
I want to
I
put a
love
pin in
that.
that story. So wait, what happened after you passed out?
Eventually my husband got a brush. Like there's a really gentle brush that we use in the hives to brush the bees off the frames. So he just brushed them all off of me. And for the ones that were like on my head and on the rest of my suit weren't they weren't upset. It was the ones I was like crushing that were getting
Oh,
like feeling threatened. So they just kind of
Fair
okay.
fall off
enough.
of you. Yeah, we tried to brush them into the hive. I don't think that hive ended up surviving anyway. It just was like too late. I mean, that's kind of the thing with some of the pesticides, the glyphosate and like some of the GMO things that are around because we're in Iowa where it's all farmland. And
Okay.
those things mess with the bees' circadian rhythm. It messes with their sense of the
Oh,
seasons. It messes with their sense of direction. And so more and more you have hives swarming at inappropriate times of the year, which wouldn't have been instinctual to them, but all of that circuitry has been messed with by the pesticides. And so that's why things like that
Wow.
happen. So unfortunately, I don't think that that hive survived. And we knew it was a slim chance anyway,
Yeah.
but it was worth trying to us if we could save them. But yeah, yeah, he brushed them all off of me, and then I eventually regained my composure
Oh
enough
my God.
enough to get inside. I really was traumatized for a while
Yeah.
after that.
oh,
Well,
Like,
that is a lot. I mean,
mhm.
yeah,
one bee sting hurts.
yeah,
Never mind around your ankles and feeling claustrophobic. I mean, you survived that situation and you still go out and do it. Like,
yeah,
I mean, that says a lot. Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
So what do you think is one of your like uh thing you started with homesteading where you're like, that was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be?
I would say animals are easier than you think they'll be, and gardens to me are harder.
Okay.
Like
Oh.
more maintenance, not hard.
Mm,
It's not difficult to take care of them. It's just more maintenance than you would expect. But I would say probably like the thing we tried that ultimately wasn't worth it to us because of the amount of effort was having goats for dairy. So now they're just our little grass puppies. They basically are our freeloading pets. But I call them my therapy animals. But I think like there were a couple of things. One was when we started the CSA, so trying to feed other people from our garden. That was so intensive because we scaled everything up so much. And you don't think about that. Like a small garden where you're growing food for yourself is pretty
yeah.
straightforward. You can spend a couple hours weeding max a week, and you might water, and that might take an hour. But when you scale up to grow food on a bigger level, whether you're trying to grow all the food you're going to eat in a year, which has always been a goal of ours too, or you're trying to feed other families, once you scale up, you realize it's a lot of time weeding, watering, harvesting. If you don't get smart and use infrastructure like irrigation and drip hoses, then you're going to spend hours watering, especially if you're in a climate like Iowa where it gets really hot in the summer and we might go long stretches of time without rainfall on a drought year. So, um, I would say that that was probably the thing that was unexpected. And I didn't plan for how much time it would take to harvest everything. And then it's one thing when you're growing food for yourself and if you start depending on it, suddenly like weather becomes a really serious issue. We
Yeah.
had a year in the CSA garden where we had this freak hailstorm late in the season. It was July maybe. And all of our peppers were already mature, and we had watermelons and pumpkins and squash, and everything was already mature, which is, it's late for that level of like a hailstorm, but it was just 5 minutes of this destructive, insane, never seen anything like it hail. It destroyed every pepper on our plant. It destroyed all of our watermelons because it poked holes through everything,
Right.
and you can't use it. All of our pumpkins. And then, at that point we had a CSA, so it was like people were like, what are we going to give people this week? We lost like hundreds of peppers and like tomatoes and melons and so things like that. And then, on the other side, if you were going to plan to use those things to feed yourself, like that
Mm.
also becomes suddenly you're at the mercy of like the acts of God that happen in nature. And so it's just adds a new element of pressure compared to here's my fun garden that I'm growing outside of my apartment door, where it's
Right.
weed whacked and I'm heartbroken, but it's not like it affects whether I can feed my family. Um,
Uh-huh.
Right.
so I'd say
What
like
did
that's
you
kind of the
do in
element
the
of it.
situation with like after the hail storm ruined it? What did you do for the,
Yeah, we still had something. So kale is really hardy and it stripped some of the leaves, but there were like younger leaves underneath that survived. So I remember we gave people a lot of kale. The acorn squash were really hardy. They have thick skins. They
Mhm.
survived. The butternut squash survived. So we had those. We had some things underground, like carrots, which weren't affected. So we just supplied with what we had. But,
Yeah.
when you sign up for a CSA, you're partnering with the farmer. And so you take on some of that risk. So, before we gardened and grew our own food, we would get a CSA share, community supported agriculture share, every year.
Mhm.
And you pay up front, which helps the farmer, the grower pay for infrastructure, things like the irrigation, things like fencing to keep deer out, things like stakes, to put plants on. It helps them cover their costs. But as you do that, you're kind of doing it accepting the risk that inclement weather might come through and you might not get a share that year. A tornado might rip through their farm and they may
Mm.
lose everything. And you've already paid your $500 and you may only have produce that goes through July instead of September. It's kind of like you're sharing the risk,
Yeah.
but for the most part, it pays off. I mean, we never had, when we got CSA shares, they would let us know sometimes, hey, we're not going to have the tomato harvest we expected this year. Like deer came through and ate 40 plants. That happened to us one time.
Oh man.
Literally had deer get over our fence and snip every tomato, 40 plants off, like at the center. And so then they were stunted and then they had to take extra time to grow. And so I think it's in a lot of ways, it's really good for the buyers to see things like that and to go through
Yeah.
things like that with the farmer because they realize oh, like the food I buy in the supermarket comes from all over the world and they have all these backup plans, but real food grown in real spaces, like in your community, is not guaranteed. And I think it's
Right.
like it lets people see it takes a lot of effort to bring food to the table. I think we're
Mhm.
so disconnected with that these days. Like most the average American is going to the grocery store. They're buying packaged food, processed foods. The foods aren't alive. They don't have any life in them. What grew originally to produce that food has long since been dried up and ground away and it's nothing that resembles anything living anymore. And then when we do buy produce from the supermarket, it's usually shipped in from around the world. It's picked
Yeah.
unripe. It's grown in soil that doesn't have a lot of nutrition to begin with. And then the thing that puts nutrition into fruits and vegetables is the ripening process, which it doesn't go through on the plant. It gets picked before then so that it can be shipped in trucks without bruising.
Right.
And so it's just not alive anymore, and we're so disconnected from our food. So even though it's hard as the producer to disappoint people, I actually think it's
Mhm.
really good for the buyers to see that this is what happens with real food, and real food doesn't necessarily come easy, but it's
Mm.
so worth the effort. And you just
Mhm.
you're eating seasonally, you're eating within 5 or 10 miles of where you live. Like everything is so much more alive that way that I think it's worth taking that risk that you may not have a share one week or you may not have everything you wanted. And for the most part, people are so overloaded with what comes in the shares because there's such an abundance and a bounty that I think a lot of people were glad to just have a couple weeks off.
Yeah. Yeah, because you definitely would want to make sure like when you're in these types of programs, like you're using all that you have. I mean, on such a small level, like during 2020, me and my mom got into gardening and it was a very small garden, but that was we put our like blood, sweat, and tears into that. And we would send each other pictures. I'm like, oh my goodness, the tomatoes, they're almost ready. And then we'd make a beautiful salad, or we'd have our peppers. And it just felt like there was something just so rewarding. And it was really therapeutic as well. Again, on a very
Mhm.
small level. And then me and my fiance had moved to different apartments or whatever, and we bought a house last year. And it was my mission to like set up a garden last summer. And, life happened that didn't happen. But I'm like, going into this next year, I want to get some tomatoes and peppers going because it's such a cool experience. And you're right, you do appreciate the food so much more. So I can't even imagine having on such a large level where you get to be in people's homes, right? The food that you've grown is in people's home, feeding people, nourishing people. Like that is such a love language.
Yeah. And it is like, food security for me is a huge part of why we do what we do. We don't have the CSA anymore. I did it through school. And then when I graduated and started working more full time, I couldn't maintain the CSA in that. But we do grow as much of our own food as we can. And it's food security. I mean, we have
Mm.
backyard chickens that are laying eggs right now. We're not paying 12, 13, $14 a dozen for eggs we can't even find on the shelves, right? And
Yeah.
we're always going to have that access to those eggs. If the world ended tomorrow and we couldn't get to any source of food, eggs can sustain you for however long you need. I mean, they're the perfect balance of amino acids and vitamins and proteins. And so it's literally like because it sustains a chick as it grows, it's literally everything you need for fat, protein, and the micronutrients. And so, like, there's just something in knowing if, as Joel Salatin says, if the wheels fell off tomorrow and you couldn't get to the grocery store, we have freezers full of produce we grew. We have kale that we packed, tomatoes that we packed and froze away. We have fermented vegetables, like we make our own sauerkraut and that'll last for years. We ferment our own salsa and that'll last for years. It's living foods that we grew ourselves that are nutrient dense, that are in our freezers, that we have a backup generator for, and then we have eggs from our chickens. Like we could really truly survive even if we couldn't get to the store for the next
Mm.
5 years. And I think that
Wow.
that's a really, that feeling of security makes every bit of effort worth it to me because
Sure.
I don't have the anxiety of what happens. I mean, we saw that in the midst of the like pandemic where beef started disappearing from the shelf. Well, we
Yeah.
have a neighbor who has cows that we get hamburger from, and we buy a beef share from a local farmer who's just a couple miles down the road. We didn't feel any of the pain of that. I mean, his
Yeah.
prices had to go up slightly because the cost of feed was going up, but his animals are out on pasture for the most part, and so like they're eating the grass. It doesn't matter what grain costs or corn costs or any of those things. And so when you're really like within that system, you're eating food
Yeah.
in the like that's grown on pasture, that's being raised in sustainable principles, and you're growing your own food, you don't have that fear of, am I going to have
Mhm.
food tomorrow? What if I can't get to the grocery store? What if? Like, I don't live in that at all. I know that at any given moment, we can set up our grow rack, plug in our lights, and start seedlings and just start growing plants. I mean, if all we could do was grow sprouts and just eat the sprouts, that would sustain us nutritionally. So I think there's a lot of benefit to having the knowledge and the know-how to grow your own food and knowing how to create that infrastructure, how to build a chicken coop, how to raise chickens, how to, whatever,
Yeah.
raise animals, raise plants, whatever it ends up being. There's a lot of security in having that kind of knowledge where, if the wheels fell off tomorrow and the rest of the world was struggling to find food on our little 5 acre plot, and frankly, on a half-acre plot, you could grow everything you need. There's people
Yeah. Wow.
that do that. So I think there's just, to me, it's so worth the time, the blood, the sweat, the tears to know we'll be secure in that way and
Mm.
not have to think about at least that element of things.
Right. And with my friend, she has chickens and she gardens and she's always making her sourdough loaves. Like she is, I would call her like homesteading light.
Yeah.
Um, but she will bring us eggs and it is uh, it's cool and it kind of grosses me out. Like you can leave them on the countertop for a certain amount of time, which is like it's amazing because they, you wash them because it takes whatever the film off, whatever it is. But it's like wow, like don't even have to put these in the refrigerator. Like, and then I'm like, well, why are we putting the other ones in the refrigerator from the grocery store and these don't have to be? And then the yolk is just such a more rich color. It's just like I love the idea. And I've heard when you have chickens, have you experienced like some people get like a rat problem? Have you ever
Oh,
A rat,
experienced that?
a rat problem.
not rats. There are mice that live in
Oh,
the coop.
okay.
Um,
Okay.
and that's an issue because keep like to make a coop that's built on the ground, like tight against mice is
Yeah.
pretty difficult. So there are
Yeah.
mice that get in the coop, and the biggest problem with that is they'll eat the chicken feed at night and they can contaminate it. And people
Right.
do
Oh.
get sick from their gross, nasty mouse viruses. Fortunately, chickens like to eat mice, so we do
Mm.
sometimes find like bits of mice around that
Oh God.
they moved out at the wrong time, I guess. But that's been the biggest problem. We've never had issues with rats.
Okay.
We've
I
had
heard someone I know, they had chickens and unfortunately a bear got
oh,
in.
oh God.
Um,
Oh.
because they have a bear, like they have an electric fence, and if the bear gets close, it'll start ticking. The fence went down for some reason or another. The bear took out two hives and the chickens, unfortunately. So they hadn't got back into it, but they're like, yeah, we had rats. And I don't know why that happened, but it is always very interesting to think about. You have to think about, okay, if we have this one thing, what else might occur? And I wouldn't even think like, oh yeah, if you're building a chicken coop, it would be really easy if it's on the ground for
Mhm.
mice to potentially get in. Like it's a lot of thinking. You really have to
Yeah,
be
it's kind
very
of a
thought
lot of
out about
problem
it.
solving. And I think I'm
Yeah.
the sort of person too. My husband is the sort of person who's like, he wants to know every problem that's going to happen before we go into it. And
Mm.
I'm the kind of person that I'm like, let's start and then solve the problems as they come up. So we're a good balance because I would just jump into the deep end every time and probably probably just like collapse us from just taking on projects we can't, but he would also never move forward. So it's like a good balance.
Mm.
But yeah, there's a lot of things that come up when you're like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Mm.
Like aerial predators are a problem if you have chickens out on pasture like we do. We have to think about that.
Right.
You have to think about, okay, we're starting them in a new area that's just grass. Now they don't have trees. They need tree cover. They need things to hide under. So, when their area was brand new, we put out like shelters of pallets that were stacked that they could hide under from hawks. Um, so yeah, there's kind of just an element of you problem solve as you go along. And I think that that's a cool piece of it too. There's things that are frustrating, like we cannot figure out how to keep sparrows out of the coop, and sparrows carry all sorts of diseases and
Mm.
worms and parasites that they pass on to our
Ooh.
chickens. So we're always having to like be very preventative with that, which is why we keep them out on pasture and why we give them fresh air and good water. And like we mix herbs in with their food every single day that are natural dewormers, natural
Wow.
antibiotics. Like we load them
They're
up.
probably eating better than some people.
Yeah, I think so. And then it goes into the eggs. It's all nutritious. But that's why, there's things like that that are frustrating to have to deal with. But there's also something about just like having to use your brain and your problem solving skills on a daily basis that gives you kind of this sense of confidence and achievement that like you just don't quite get when you're working at a 9 to 5 desk job,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the benefit of it, but there is a lot to think about. And anytime you're expanding into nature, you're going to run into nature. So, if you're
Mhm.
putting a warm, dry, secure coop filled with food out into the middle of a field, like of course mice are going to move in. That's the ideal habitat for them. And
Mm.
Mhm.
so it is just like that's going to happen. And you can fight it all you want, but if you can just learn to work with it, then it makes
Yeah.
life easier. So
There's something very alluring to me, like being like a ranch hand. Like it just sounds like I think from I knew Allie would laugh. I think it's just from like working so much on an online business. Like for
yeah.
me, like shutting off my brain and just like digging a hole. Like that just kind of sounds fun. I don't know why, but I mean I like manual labor, so that's probably also why it's alluring to me.
Yeah, it's
I
very
think we get,
like
yeah.
reward
Sorry.
based, right? No, like my husband is he's a software engineer. He spends all of his days basically working on the computer. And then at the end of the day, the best part of his day is being able to like he says feel like he actually accomplished something. Like going out and
Mhm.
chopping wood for the wood burning stove or fixing the fencing around the trees in our orchard or setting up a couple like extra pieces of irrigation so we can water our garden better or our fruit trees better. Like that's the only time of the day he really feels like he can actually have this sense of accomplishment because he accomplishes things at his job all day, but it's not the same feeling. It's not like that satisfying like feeling of accomplishing something that like impacts your life for the better. It's just little tiny like micro problems he's solving for somebody else day in and day out.
Mm.
And so I think it's really it's you're right, Maddie. There's just something about like getting your hands dirty, being in the dirt
Mhm.
and seeing the actual fruit of your labors. I mean, I've been growing seeds like plants from seeds basically for 10 years and it never gets old that like to me this little tiny seed eventually becomes this plant that bears enough fruits or vegetables to feed us for an entire season. Like that's crazy to me. That's
Mhm.
crazy. And every year I'm like filled with the awe and the wonder of that. And so it is just like there's nothing quite like that feeling of accomplishment of I literally planted this tiny seed and now I can help feed my family through the winter and I did something. Like I worked hard.
Yeah.
I did something, I accomplished something. It's like one of my favorite things about a homestead.
Man, I wanna do one now. Where would you say, you would for a beginner, a total beginner, let's say someone who has maybe they could put some, like, pots of soil, like, on their back deck or they have a small area, like, where would you start for them?
Yeah, you can start so small. I love it. I think anybody could grow anything. Even if you're in a high-rise apartment, if you have a balcony and
Mhm.
sunlight, you can put a pot out and you could grow tomatoes, you could grow peppers, you could grow cucumbers, you could grow basil, like you could just grow herbs. I think the best place to start is to think about what do you use the most, like
Mm.
in your cooking. And if you're not cooking, maybe that's the place to start is like a couple meals a week. If you're eating every meal out, start making your own food and then you have a reason to grow your own produce, right? And you start to become in touch with what you do and don't like. But I would say start with the thing you use the most. So if, during the summer, you're just like a fresh salad person and that's what you love, start with growing salad greens. It's so easy. They're a quick turnover. You can harvest them again and again and again, and they grow back. And if they have enough sunlight and good aerated soil, they'll grow just fine through an entire season. Or grow kale or grow spinach. Those are really easy, like small scale plants. Kale produces a lot, a single plant produces a lot. So you can have what you need to eat fresh and then you can freeze some so that you have it through the
Yeah.
winter. I like to use that in soup. So I would say, first
Mm.
of all, know what are you going to use the most of? Most people like to start with tomatoes. And if you're going to, like we do, like make your own salsa and you want to can tomatoes or whatever, and you really use that many tomatoes, that's good. But I find a lot of people grow tomatoes, but not a lot of people eat tomatoes in the quantity that they grow. So it's not
Mm.
always
Mm.
necessarily the best thing. It's just an easy, hearty thing. But like, I don't eat a lot of fresh tomatoes. I make salsa, and you need a lot of tomatoes for that. And then we ferment it. But like, if you're not doing something like that, you might not want to grow tomatoes because you can freeze
Mhm.
them. We do freeze them, but you're limited.
Like whole?
Yeah, we cut them up and freeze them just like in like little 1 inch chunks. And we grow paste tomatoes. So it's
Yeah.
also good
Mm.
to know, like, okay, are you growing fresh eating tomatoes? Are you growing tomatoes you want to
Mm.
preserve? Are you wanting to use them for sauce? Are you wanting to can them? Like, just think through, what do you use the most, and try and grow that one thing. And so
Right.
that's where it's like, maybe tomatoes aren't the thing you use the most of. It's just the thing you hear everybody growing in a container. And so that's what you do. But if it's not going to be
Mhm.
something you want to use, that gets to be sort of a frustrating feeling because a lot of it can go to waste.
Mhm.
But if you eat a lot of
Right.
salads and you grow your own salad greens, that's a really cool feeling. Or if you like sprouts and you just grow your own sprouts, like that's easy. Or if you want kale, or if you want cucumbers, like you're a big cucumber water person and you have cucumber water every day, then grow your own cucumbers. So I think it's like, that's where I always recommend people start, if you're, especially if you're going to be on the smaller side, is like, just try and grow. If you're not used to it, try and grow one or two things. Herbs are such an easy place to start. You can dry
Mm.
them, you can use them throughout the year. They're so easy to preserve. There's all sorts of ways to like prolong their life, and they're wonderful to use in fresh cooking. They add so much nutritional value.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, a little container. And then the fun thing is, then you can start composting your food scrap. So, like anything that's not meat or dairy, that's like organic waste that you have, whether it's like peels, like vegetable peels, like you peel a carrot or you peel a cucumber, like that can go into compost. Coffee grounds can go into compost. Eggshells can go into compost. You just don't want to put meat or dairy into it. It's too much protein and nitrogen for the soil. But everything else pretty much can go into compost. And then you get to use that compost in your little pot. And then that's fun. Like then you start feeling like you're building this little
Really, yeah.
self-sustaining cycle.
Oh.
So with compost, how do you start it? Like I always we used to live in Vermont and they had like incentives for composting.
Oh, I didn't know
Uh
that.
yeah, it was really cool, but I think there's also like an intimidation factor with a lot of these things because you're right, so many people are just on autopilot. You have your job, you go to the grocery store, you do things, and to try something new, if you're not like in a supportive environment, like we moved, bought a house in New Hampshire to be closer to our family in Massachusetts. I don't know anyone who composts here. In Vermont, everybody was doing it. So I lost that edge a little bit, but it's easy enough, I would imagine.
Oh yeah. It just takes time. Like you can't expect that you're going to have what you need today. It's
Right.
like what you compost today becomes what you can use next year, basically. So
Okay.
it does help. Okay, now there are countertop units now. I'm sure, like, I don't know if you've heard
Yeah.
or seen these, where you can put your food scraps in and it does turn them into compost much faster. It goes through a special, like, grinding process, drying process.
Oh.
So those are really cool if you're going to be like a balcony gardener. Um,
Right.
if you don't have a backyard, I would say like it's worth investing in one of those. They're not perfect. I know plenty of people who are like, it's not the same as real compost. And no, it's not, but you're gardening on a balcony. Like you're gonna take what you can
Yeah.
get, right? But if you have a yard space, what we do is we just save all of our food scraps and then we keep it in a pile in our yard. And then we have chickens, so they dig through it. They naturally stir it up for us. But if you don't have chickens or animals that are going through it and like turning it like around for you, you just have to go out with like a shovel and flip the pile every once in a while just to like keep things rotating
Yeah.
through. But yeah, like the next year, if you want to have a garden, if you start building that up now and kind of planning for that now, even if it's just a small like corner of your yard, um, it's a really great way to start putting nutrients back into your soil because most soil that we
Yeah.
have today is dead. It's free. I mean, if you buy compost, it's rather expensive. If you have your own
Right.
food scraps, so it's no extra cost to you. And then it's just the effort of like maybe shoveling the pile and moving it through. And we in our last house had like a barrel container that had a handle and was like raised off the ground. And so we could just turn the handle and we put all of our compost scraps in that. And then we would like rotate the handle and then you could scoop the compost out of that. So there's all
Ah,
sorts of things that like
sure.
make it easy now. But like if you're in an apartment, those little countertop ones are, I think, a great investment, to just like be able to have something. Because if you buy potting soil, it will have fertilizers in it. It will have like nutrients in
Mm,
it, but it's not the same as like dirt from the
Sure.
earth. Like it's fairly dead. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's just like it helps to put some nutrition and life back into it. And in nature, that would take the form of dried leaves and plant matter and like decaying stems and fruit and stuff. So the more you can put that into the soil, the more nutrient dense the food you're growing yourself will be.
Mm.
mm.
So do you put your food scraps into like with soil, or is it just like, let's imagine like a bin, all the food scraps, the eggshells, all that sort of stuff in a bin, and like it breaks down and
It
becomes
breaks down.
soil? Wow.
Yeah, over time it breaks down because there's bacteria in it that
Yep,
digest it,
yep.
and then there will be fungus in it. We now in our new house have like a pretty big garden in our backyard. So we just have
Yeah.
at the very front of our garden, this is my preferred way to do it.
Yeah.
We just have a section where we can put all of our food scraps that become the compost. And then because we let our chickens go through the garden, we will block them out once things like tomatoes are ripening or kale's ripening because they'll eat them. But a lot of the years we can let like the chickens move through the garden and they'll go for the compost like inevitably first thing. So it's already sitting on the soil. They're going to go through. They like to eat the eggshells, like it's good calcium for them. They like to pick through and find the little bits of like berries and things, whatever they
Right.
want. Then they're kicking it around and like scratching through it. So they're turning the pile for us.
Yeah.
And then usually they kind of just distribute it on their own through the garden too. So we end up not having to do that piece either because eventually like
That's
what was a
awesome.
big pile just gets kicked out into the garden. And sometimes it wasn't ready to be distributed through the garden. So I'll be like going to like plant something and I'll just find like a whole eggshell. But for the most part, pretty well.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Wow.
Everything works together. That's
Yeah, I
so
was gonna
cool.
say that. I mean, it's a whole system, and it's like you're working smarter, not harder to do these things. It reminds me of, I wish I would have kept the name in my head. It was a farmer. I believe he's a farmer in Texas. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and it was about how he changed everything to organic farming. And there's a specific name. I think you said it earlier,
Like
where it's like
permaculture.
permaculture. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So he like changed the whole farm to where everything is helping, each other out. And the water runoff, they were saying, from his farm versus a farm across the street that used pesticides and doesn't use like anything they get from the animal. It was like crystal clear water was his water, and then the other was like sewage.
Yeah.
And he was saying it took him, I think, 10 or 15 years and a lot of money to become that type of farm. But like what he produces and what he's not producing, like exhaust and sewage wise, like it's insane. Insane.
Yeah,
Wow.
you're building the soil up. Conventional farming depletes the soil. It takes nutrients from the soil. It erodes the soil. It dries the soil out, and then the soil blows away. And that's what happened in the Dust
Ah.
Bowl, right? That's why when like California went through that whole period of the Dust Bowl and they lost everything, it was because of soil loss. And we're really kind of heading that way again as a nation because of the way that we treat our soil by growing monoculture crops, by not putting
Mhm.
nutrients in it, by allowing it to like run off, not creating systems that keep it in place, but rain
Mm.
wash it away. When you lose those top layers of soil and you start getting really nutrient poor soil, the crops aren't growing well, and then pretty soon you just have dead dirt. And so, organic farming and permaculture farming, the whole principle is building the soil up. And it feels like a sort of boring topic to talk about, but it's the most important thing is like if you don't build your soil up and put nutrition back into the soil, what do you think is going into the plants that you're trying to grow? Like there's no life for
Mm-hmm.
them. There's no microbiome to interact with them to bring them the nutrients they need and to help them. Like all of nature, when soil is living, thrives. And when soil is dead and infertile, it's just this huge struggle. You have weeds, you have pests, you have sickness. I mean, plants, the reason plants become susceptible to pests is because the plants are unhealthy in the first part. This is like one of the things I learned really early on into homesteading, and it's fascinating to me. If you're having a pest problem and you're having plants getting attacked by a lot of bugs, then it means that the plant itself has some sort of deficiency and is suffering. And plants will
Oh.
actually put out a distress signal, which bugs pick up. And so a plant that's distressed is a plant that's infested, and those bugs are telling you something. So when you
Mm.
think about the
Mm.
farming, the conventional farming that we do on a more national scale here, we're constantly fighting weeds. They're constantly fighting insects. So what do they have to do? They have to create like GMO crops that are insect resistant. They have to spray with pesticides. They have to spray with herbicides. Well, why do they have to do that? Because a healthy plant shouldn't be succumbing to pests like that. So the reason is that the soil is dead. The plants don't have the nutrients they need. The plants are unhealthy. They're putting out distress signals. And then insects and pests are coming to find them because that's the way nature works. Like that's how it was designed. It's supposed to be survival of the fittest. The plants that don't have good genetics, that don't have good nutrition, that aren't going to make it in the long run, are basically just telling insects, I'm dying, can you kill me faster? Like,
Mm.
so it's like
Oh, wow.
it's there's a reason. Like there's a reason why there's so much pesticide use and herbicide use in traditional agriculture, and it's because the plants are not healthy. But it does take time and it does take an investment to build your soil up. But once you're there, you don't need those inputs. Like once you start letting the nature work in and for itself, suddenly like you don't have to be out there spraying to keep pests away because your plants are healthy. They can do it themselves.
Right.
And it's kind of
Mm.
like, to me, it's so logical and straightforward. It's like you look at
Mhm.
how the world is doing things, you're like, doesn't anybody else like, don't you guys see this problem? Like
Mhm.
I feel like I'm taking crazy
Mhm.
pills. Like, doesn't everybody else see this? It seems so obvious to me that the answer is like we just need to put more nutrition into our soil, and a few years down the road, we'll stop having all of these issues with, viruses and bacteria infections and parasites and insects and all of that happening in our crops, and we wouldn't have to be
Mhm.
using all of these sprays. But that's changing like a whole system, and that's pretty monumental.
I mean, that's the conversation for everything. I mean, literally everything. Like, why not teach people that the food pyramid is not actually the best way to do it? Why not teach more women to lift weights and, the rest of their life, we won't have to be worried about falling at 60 and breaking a hip? It's just changing, like you said, the bigger system in which our system is so based on like, how can we make more money?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think anybody can influence that system because we vote with our dollars. And
Mhm.
so the best way to like make a bigger change on a global or national level is to make a small change within your own household. And so that's why I think homesteading is amazing. Like I said, you can literally grow all the food you need on a half acre or less. I've seen people do it. It just takes planning and systems, but you
Right.
can have chickens, you can have crops, you can move your chickens through your garden, through your crops. You can grow everything you need. You need the right freezer and space and storage and generators and things like that. But once you have the infrastructure set up, even on a half acre of land, you could feed a family. I mean,
Mhm.
easily. And you don't have to start with that today. You could vote with your dollars by simply getting a pack of seeds and starting your own lettuce garden or starting your own flower garden or your own
Sure.
herbs. I mean, you can just buy one less conventional thing by growing it yourself. Or if you really truly don't have the capacity to grow something yourself, support the people who are doing it in their backyards. Find somebody who
Mhm.
has backyard chickens and buy eggs from them. Most of us are overwhelmed with eggs. If we're getting a dozen a day, we're not eating a dozen a day. So like,
Right.
find somebody local, just on a micro level. Find a farmer who's within 10 or 20 miles of you and buy a meat share from them or get a CSA share. It's actually all ends up being a very good deal. You pay an upfront cost, which can feel like whoa, that's a big investment. But when you break it down, you're actually saving quite a lot of money by investing that way in your food. If you were to buy all of those organic, good permaculture, sustainably grown items individually in the grocery store, you'd spend 3 times as much as you spend
Mhm.
just investing in a
Yeah.
say share. So vote with your dollars, like support the people that are doing it right. And the more we do that and we support that infrastructure, the more power it takes away from the big monster
Mhm.
subsidized companies that are not doing it in a way that's sustainable, that are not doing it in a way that's beneficial to our health, that are not doing it in a way that will protect our planet and its resources. If everybody made that change, those companies would be bankrupt in no time. And
Yeah.
it's just a matter of making the change. But like I said, it just requires investment up front. Whether you're growing it yourself, you're investing in buying the pot that's going to go out in your balcony and you're going to buy the dirt and you might buy, the seedling starts or the little seedlings or whatever. It's like an upfront investment, but it's so worth it in the end when you have all those things in place, that you could grow your own food even on a micro level and take at least $3 away from like the big guys
Yeah.
that aren't doing it
Yeah.
the right way.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just like the image that you get in your head of like when it's a domino effect, right? Even if you live in a small apartment and you don't have the space to grow your tomatoes, well, I'm sure you can buy local honey or eggs, right? Like that is just doing the little thing. And then it has this effect that creates waves over time. And there's something that I always just like as a business owner, anytime I can support and like shop smaller and support people's families and know where things are coming from, like that just makes me feel better. And I know I am investing in someone's family. I'm investing in the things that they're doing and their passion. And I'd rather anytime if I can shop small, that's where I'm trying to go.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
That's why I love Etsy. Like I ordered like I think 6 bars of like beef tallow soap because I try to just minimize what I'm putting on my skin. But Etsy's a great place for that. I'm sure they take like a lot of a lot of what they're making, but you can find someone on there and then go on their website from there, and so they're getting more. But yeah, I'd rather always support someone, and that's their passion, and typically it's better product anyway.
Yeah, and like farmers markets are a great
Farmers market.
place
Yeah.
to start.
Hmm.
I mean, most of what you're getting in a farmer's market is something somebody grew locally, if it's like a good, reliable farmer's market. Roadside stands, if you're
Yeah.
like, I always saw a ton of those in California. I don't see as many of them in Iowa, but you're just driving and there's a roadside stand. And so many of them are
Yep.
like
Hmm.
honor system. They'd
They
have
really
bags
are.
of
I'm
like
always like,
oranges. Oh man, in Iowa, there's so much that's honor system. Like you could be
yeah.
driving along the road and there can be an egg stand and it's like a lock box and they're like, $3 and that's what we're expecting you to put in. I mean, it's
Yep.
it's honor system. I think though when you create systems like that and you trust people, they
Yeah.
naturally respond to that. And
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
I think there is just something to that. Like if you tell people you trust them, then they respond appropriately and they'll put the money in anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything like that. Little roadside stands, farmers markets. I mean, I I've looked like in the work we've been doing on our documentary with our subjects, I look at every area our subjects are in and find them local food. And I've yet to have somebody be someplace where I can't find local food
Yeah.
options for them, where I can always find like a beef share for them, a chicken share, maybe a pork share. I can find them local vegetables and CSAs. I can find them local farmers markets. And so I think there are real food deserts out there.
Yeah.
Most people
Certainly.
don't live in them. I mean, and I do know that they're out there, and that's something like a change that has to happen. And it's yeah. And maybe if you're in one of those situations where you're in a food desert, your best route is going to be growing your own food. But even if you don't
Yeah.
have your own land, maybe a neighbor does. Like maybe a neighbor wouldn't mind sharing some space with you. If you say, "Hey, I want to grow a garden and you can just take half the produce if you let me grow it on your land." A lot of people work things like that out.
Yeah.
Or community gardens or people who are in like apartments sometimes will have like a community garden where everybody can go and work, anybody can plant seeds. and then anybody can partake of the harvest. So there's just lots of ways to do it yourself,
Mhm.
but it does require you sometimes to be creative and think outside of the box. But if you don't do it, if you don't just start small doing something, then it's never going to change. And you can't expect it to change if you're not part of creating the change. Because if you continue
Mm.
buying from the mass supermarkets and the mass producers and the GMOs and the non-organics and the people who are doing things that are really like harming our planets, if you support their business, what incentive do they have to make any of those necessary changes? And so you can't expect that to just to happen without you actually doing something and taking a step.
Right.
Right, right. Oh man, we're gonna have to have you come back on to talk about more about your documentary because we don't want to take more of your time. I
Yeah.
know we could go on forever and ever, but where can our listeners find you? And when is your documentary coming out?
Yeah, so anybody can find us. We have the Renegade Nutrition podcast that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, I think a few others. Um, and then you can find my social media. I'm on Instagram as the_renegade_nutritionist. We're not really anywhere else. I'm barely on Instagram as it is. I'm pretty sporadic. Social media is like makes my soul weep, but but it's also kind of a necessary evil. Like to get your message out there, you have to be on the social media, but I don't enjoy it.
Mhm.
But I don't know, it's a constant struggle. But I am more active on that account, the_renegade nutritionist or the_renegade_nutritionist. And then I also, if you're interested in, like, I don't maintain it so much now, but we had like our homesteading farming account. It was at Welch, WELCH, Welch_family_farms.
Mhm.
I haven't like maintained it, but if you go through there, there's lots of information that we've shared in the past about like trials and errors and mistakes we've made and tips and tricks for beekeeping and stuff. So you can kind of go through those archives. And then for the documentary, you could learn more about the documentary. You can go to therenegadenutritionist.com. And then we have a documentary tab. And you can also go to aliveandwelldocumentary.com, which is, it will take you to the same page. So the documentary is called Alive and Well, Healing from Within, and we're following three families as they're struggling through chronic and autoimmune disease, and we're helping them heal
Oh
from
wow.
those autoimmune and chronic diseases through nutrition, lifestyle
Mhm.
changes, as well as helping them deal with past emotional traumas and processing like energetic blocks and helping them with the mindset and the rest and the
Mhm.
recovery. And so there's a lot of
Mhm.
elements to it. It's a holistic approach to health. And so we expect that documentary to come out about 2027. It takes
Mhm.
time. We have to follow the stories. One of the families that we're following in Edmonton, the husband has early onset Alzheimer's and he's 49. And at the time, the
Wow.
doctors gave him about 3 to 5 years.
Mm.
They have two girls. They had kids younger or later in life. So they have two daughters that are 3 and 5 now.
Oh,
Um, yeah, and since we've started working with them, he's had tremendous improvements. His memory is coming back. He's not struggling to find
wow.
words in mid-sentence anymore. He's starting to remember buildings as they drive around. Like there's huge changes that have happened that are
Wow.
significant for them. So, yeah, I think it's been exciting to work with them. And like just in the note of homesteading, one of my favorite pieces was hooking them up with local farmers and helping them find local food where they had
Mhm.
that food security. They had high quality, nutritious food, which is what they needed for his brain to heal. They were eating a very Western diet. And
Mhm.
so just swapping out some of those really processed products for like fresh meat from a farm and a local CSA share, and they go to their farmer's market now and get like local produce. Like it's made such a big difference for him. Where Alzheimer's is supposed to be this thing that's irreversible and
Mhm.
unstoppable, and making those dietary swaps. We haven't even done the rest of the protocol with them yet. We've just been working on the diet so far. Has already made that much of a difference. So, you know, I
Wow.
think that's been one of the most rewarding things is I've always known that having like eating seasonally and having locally grown food makes a big difference, but I didn't realize it was going to be that obvious of a difference.
Yeah.
Right away.
Wow. Well, I'm excited to have you on later to talk more about their progress and give us more tidbits so we can be excited for when it comes out.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was all that encompassing. So that's really exciting.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's been a rewarding journey so far, and it's also a lot of work. 'Cause
Yeah.
yeah, but it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to really open people's eyes to the healing modalities that are out there, especially when, the medical system reaches its limits, like it does with Alzheimer's, where it
Yeah.
doesn't really have many tools to deal with something like that. It has
Hmm.
pharmaceuticals that really aren't effective, and pretty
Hmm.
much that's it. That's what they've got. And so when you reach the limits of that, to be able to give somebody hope and an answer, I don't think a lot of people realize they have those choices. So we're hoping the documentary can highlight that there's alternatives out there, that people really can heal, even if they've been told they can't, that they can. They just need the right inputs. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's going to be incredible. So alive and well, healing from within, and you can go to therenegadenutritionist.com and go to the documentary tab to learn more about it.
Great. And we'll put all that in the show notes too, so everyone can, find it wherever they're looking for it. But thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation, Allie. You feel like you enjoyed it
Yeah.
too?
It's super informative and just like, again, we like to bring people on that empower our audience and just seeing ways where you can make little changes. Like I love how you said, like, even if you're in an apartment, you have a balcony, you can do these little things because a lot of people will think, well, I don't have all this land. I don't have, all the things she's talking about. Well, there are little steps you can take. And I think that's so important to remind yourself doing something, even if it's little, you're doing something. And I just love that. It was super awesome. This documentary sounds incredible. And I feel
I
like
know.
I will be sobbing like watching it. Like it just sounds like so amazing. And I can't wait to learn more about it and be able to support you when it comes out.
Oh, well, thank you, ladies. It's really been a blast having like the opportunity to talk on your podcast today. I loved it. And one final plug is where
Mhm.
Kay, my podcast partner, and I are putting on a healing retreat. It's going to be in St. Joe, Texas, May 16th and 17th. It's a 2-day retreat. And it's on like a 200-acre ranch, and we're going to have good, nutritious farm to table food. And then we'll also have workshops with expert guest speakers to walk people through if they're dealing with their own chronic or autoimmune disease. It's going to be an opportunity for them to learn what they need to eat, how they need to live, what they need to do to overcome those diseases. We'll give them all the tools to do that, plus show them what a nutrient dense diet looks like, and then walk them through some of the basic lifestyle practices like getting outside first thing in the morning and meditating and doing some restorative movement and going for walks and being out in nature. Like all of that will be incorporated into the retreat. So if somebody is dealing with a chronic or autoimmune condition and wants to jumpstart their healing and they don't know where to begin and they're overwhelmed, that retreat will be the perfect thing for them to get started, and they'll walk away with like the tools and the confidence they need to really commit to that healing journey. So,
Oh, I want to go to that.
Yeah.
Not in the beginning stages, but
Yeah.
Go check it. I'll send you
uh,
ladies the Eventbrite link too, and we
yeah.
can link to that. But you
Yeah.
can also find it on therenegadenutritionist.com. And we do have a tab that says Alive and Wellness Retreat. So we named it after the documentary. So it's Alive and Wellness Retreat.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah,
Click
we'll
on
put
that
that
tab
all in the
so you
show
can get it.
notes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, ladies, so much. I've really appreciated
Yeah.
being on.
Yeah, it was
Thank
super
you for
awesome.
coming.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for listening or watching to Kinda Hot, Kinda Healthy. Please make sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and share this with your girlfriend who needs to start homesteading, who says she's like, I don't know how to start a garden. Now you do. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere where you can stream podcasts. If you have a burning question about life, friends, health, and 1 or 2 cents, email us at kindahotpod@gmail.com. That's KINDAHOTPOD@gmail.com. Bye.
Bye.